President Trump is touting a booming economy and record-breaking investment. So with tariff revenues soaring and jobs strong, what's next for America's financial outlook? I'm Veronica Dudo. Let's find out.
This is In America Today from the Ticker News Studios in New York City.
President Donald Trump is highlighting a surge in corporate and foreign investment, pointing to a major announcement across industries like AI and energy. With the economy growing, job numbers strong, and consumer spending up, the White House says as proof the administration's economic policies are working. At the same time, tariff revenues hit a record $87.2 billion in just the first half of the year, fueling debate over the impact of Trump's trade strategy. Now, the president is calling on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates to keep the momentum going. Meanwhile, the business community is also speaking out. Here's the co-founder of Home Depot, Ken Langone, discussing the current U.S. economy.
Look, let me tell you right now, I am sold on Trump. In fact, I'll say this. I think he's got a good shot at going down in history as one of our best presidents ever.
That is a real turnaround because you didn't want to vote for him.
I tell you the reason. I want to tell you, I'm a believer. What I'm seeing happening is absolutely nothing short of a great thing. And there's a beat. People are walking with more bounce in there. It's all around.
I gave you quite a bit of grief.
Huh?
I gave you grief.
You give me grief?
I gave you grief when it was a binary choice. You're still complaining about Trump and it was a binary choice. It's like, are you kidding me?
Knowledge implies one thing. When you made a mistake, admit it.
Okay.
I think this guy is turning out to be a president.
Right.
One of the pilots on that miraculous trip to Iran that we wiped out, whatever the hell we wiped out,
Right.
He said, you're the only guy that in the presidency that would have done what you did. One of the pilots said that.
Yeah.
And you know what?
For more, I'm joined by Todd Stankiewicz, co-portfolio manager of the Free Markets ETF. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So we just heard that clip. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. Right now, what sectors do you think are leading the wave of new investment announcements under this particular administration's term?
I think when we look at this administration, really what's driving it is a lot of executive orders and legislation aimed at deregulation or regulatory rollbacks. Notably, that's energy and industrials right now is what we're seeing.
Now, how much of this economic momentum is directly tied to the administration's trade and tariff policies?
Well, I think a lot of the trade and tariff policies are being misunderstood by the general public in certain ways. What we're seeing is a lot of the trade and tariff policies are trying to move things back into the United States, notably in the industrials, consumer discretionary with autos, and particularly with energy. But I think what's happening is a lot of companies initially and consumers were concerned about the inflationary impacts, and we see the Fed talking about this as well as citing a reason for delaying rate cuts. But ultimately, tariffs could actually be deflationary for this economy, and it could actually potentially be positive in the long run.
So when we do look at the news with the $87.2 billion for the first half of the year, the U.S. tariff revenue, has reached this number, we're being told. Who is really bearing the cost? Is this foreign exporters or American consumers, or is that still up for debate?
I think it's still up for debate. I think it's a bit of a mix, right? So I think a lot of companies don't know how to handle it quite yet. We do see some increasing prices, right? I think we're seeing that filter through to some of the inflation data initially, as we've seen some CPI data, tick up here a touch. So we do see that being passed on to the consumer, right? But ultimately, I think the end effect of it and what's going to happen with prices is a little unknown, because what's happening at the same time, as I alluded to at the beginning, was that deregulatory efforts through executive orders and legislation may actually decrease certain regulatory costs that have been burdening certain industries and certain companies initially. And what that could do is that could unlock margins and could offset some of the potential costs of tariffs, which could keep prices actually down and could not, could dampen that effect or the perceived effect on inflation.
Now, of course, this is a big week on Capitol Hill for the crypto community. Obviously, a lot of people are interested in some of the different legislation that's coming out of that and how that will impact the United States and, of course, other sectors. Now, when we start to head into the remaining 6 months of the year, you just mentioned some of that deregulation when it comes to artificial intelligence and coal and also energy. So, where do you see things going? How do you think potentially we round out this year?
I think this is all very interconnected. What we're seeing again regulation or deregulation legislation tied towards promoting AI, particularly onshore. What that's going to do is that's going to increase energy demand, and that potentially affects a lot of different sectors. And we've seen a lot of regulatory relief tied towards that, whether it's uranium. We see coal, which some executive orders came out yesterday, and we've seen some previously around that. So that's really promoting that. And I think that all plays into what we're seeing with not just cryptocurrency, but also stable coins. And a lot of the executive orders and legislation that we're seeing trying to be pushed through is potentially giving a lot of legitimization to this. Ultimately, I think that provides a lot of opportunity set for certain companies that are emerging. So I think that the players in this space, which were early movers, early adopters, and can provide basically scaling, like hyper scaling across the AI space, are going to be the opportunity sets to look at. Unfortunately, I think that it's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, where it's been these big mega cap companies, right? The Mag 7 that everyone's been talking about, because the biggest beneficiaries we're seeing are more in the small and mid cap space, more nimble companies, which are able to adapt and change to this evolving legislation and ultimately benefit from it because they've been the most heavily burdened.
Now, of course, we are talking about the executive orders and legislation, but there is the Federal Reserve. We do know President Trump has said that he would like to have seen rates cut. He has also used the European Union as an example, saying they've cut several times. Do you think the Federal Reserve is likely to respond to President Trump's calls for lower interest rates given current inflation and growth trends?
I think we have a little bit of a two-pronged situation, because ultimately Powell's probably going to be out, and we're going to see a new Federal Reserve chairman be put in. So his choice may have an influence on what the long-term rates are. Ultimately, I don't think the president's influence will affect how rates are in the short term here. Notably, the market's pricing in about 2 rate cuts this year. Most Fed officials are looking for about a 25 basis point to a 50 basis point rate cut, which would be 1 to 2 rate cuts going on the back of this year. Again, I think that the short-term blips in inflation may have delayed some of that, but what's ultimately going to happen is I think we're going to see that the tariffs aren't going to have as big of an inflationary impact as most people are thinking, as that could delay purchases, delay a little bit of demand here. And I think some of that inflationary push was on demand being pushed forward, right? So ultimately, I think we see 1 to 2 rate cuts this year. The Fed's not going to respond with about a 100 basis point rate cut like the president's calling for. And ultimately, I think they're still going to be data dependent, right? Which is a language that they're going to continue to put in there and use.
How significant is consumer spending in sustaining the administration's economic goals?
I think really important, right? It's a primary driver of the economy, right? So we need the consumer to continue to spend. What we've seen, though, is we've seen consumers are spending on a lot of credit, which is the one thing that I think is sitting in the backdrop as a potential challenge. And when we look at the different populations and the different gens that are, spending, we have to look at how impacts around some of these student loan payment deferrals and things like that may potentially move a little bit of discretionary money or discretionary potential spending out of some of these different individuals' pockets, right? So I think that's a little bit of a situation here. And if we are able to not have these inflationary pressures like a lot of people are predicting from tariffs, right, I think that could also be very positive, and that could allow discretionary spending to be really positive. But I think we saw with some of the recent earnings, like consumer staples, right, we're still seeing spending in that place, and people are still going to buy even regardless of how prices and food costs continue to go higher, right? That's just going to be consistent across the board.
Are foreign companies investing in the U.S. because of policy incentives, or are they hedging against global instability?
Uh, you know, I think really when we look at it and when we look at international companies, I think that a lot of international companies are going to try to hedge their bets a little bit, particularly European companies, and try to potentially have some, you know, keep some operations over there because you do have a little bit of instability and they're not going to want to, you know, have to be subjected to potential tariffs. But I think it's very industry specific, right? It has to do with the kind of industry that you're in, right? If we're industrial companies, if we're making stuff, that's a little different than services companies. So I think that it's going to be very highly dependent on the industry itself and the company.
Todd Stankiewicz, co-portfolio manager of the Free Markets ETF. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is Ticker. We'll be right back.